Hi Year 10, I hope you're well and having a lovely day. For your do now, what I'd like you to do is in your books, rank the characters in order of how much power and control they have in Act 1. Explain your reasons. Pause the video to do this now. Okay, so please could you write the date and title. The title is Who Has the Most Power and Control? Key Moment 2. So this is my order. It may be different to yours. Doesn't mean your order is wrong. These are just my thoughts. So I'd put the inspector first. He calls out Mr. Burling on his failings and doesn't seem fazed by Mr. Burling's self-centered, elitist approach. However, you'd be perfectly justified if you wrote Mr. Burling as your most powerful character, because you could argue that at this point in time, he does have the most power. I put him second. He does speak the most, and he doesn't like to be interrupted or have his views challenged. He's constantly affirming his position in society. So bear in mind he does emphasize his link with the chief inspector, so the chief police inspector. So he does really try and assert his authority. I would argue he doesn't have the most control or power because he's trying so hard to make it seem like he does, which indicates he's actually very insecure and not powerful. People who try too hard to look powerful often aren't. But again, that's just my perspective. Then I would put Gerald. He's respected and loved by the Burling family and seems to have financial and corporate power too, which is why Mr. Burling is so keen for their families to be united so that their businesses can join as well. And also, being a man, of course, he has more power than the women. Eric of the men seems to have the least power. He's belittled by his father, and actually it's quite sad. He seems less important to his father than Gerald. Because Gerald, remember, represents a business opportunity. Eric is just, someone who hasn't achieved very much. Then you've got Mrs. Burling. Even though she's her husband's social superior, she is sent away with the women and reduced to female stereotypes. And then you've got Sheila, young, immature, teasingly challenges Gerald but doesn't go any further. Again, a victim of female gender roles and stereotypes. So recall, she does teasingly say, there was that summer that you wouldn't come near me, alluding to the summer when he had the affair with Eva Smith. But even though she may want to call him out on it, being a woman and being subject to men, she doesn't go any further. So I'd say she has the least power. But like I said, your views may be slightly different. Just make sure you put reasons for what you put down. Okay, so what can you remember about the relationship between the inspector and Mr. Burling? Please bullet point or mind map your ideas and consider the battle for control. Pause the video to do this now. So you may have written something along these lines. Mr. Burling is constantly trying to prove his social superiority, arguably due to his deep-seated insecurity, but the inspector manages to come out on top due to his wisdom and greater knowledge. But again, if you've justified your own points, that's the key thing. Okay, so please could you reread pages 13 to 16. As you read, look out for the inspector and Burling trying to gain control. Pause the video to do this now. Okay, so we're going to read through the key moment together. There's an extract on class charts if you don't have the play, though hopefully you all have it by now. And we're going to be making notes on the presentations of characters. We'll be focusing on language and structure, but most importantly, the potential effect on the audience, both contemporary and modern. Ask yourself what themes are apparent here, and what questions could you answer using this moment? Why is it significant? So instead of trying to upload pictures, I thought it would be easier if we just went through it together. I'll read you my notes and then you can copy them down. So the moment starts at the bottom of page 13, Burling somewhat impatiently. So there I've written he feels threatened, has little tolerance for others. So you can highlight keywords if you like. You don't have to. I would highlight impatiently. That's a good adjective to describe him. So look, there's nothing mysterious or scandalous about this business. So I've highlighted business. To him, everything is business. He doesn't really care about relationships or people's feelings so much as money and business. He is a key quote for him, a hard-headed man of business. And at least not so far as I'm concerned. It's a perfectly straightforward case. So the word perfectly, the adjective perfectly, indicates how everything's very black and white with him. He has a very reductivist view. He's not very nuanced in his perspective. And as it happened more than 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago, obviously it has nothing whatever to do with the wretched girl's suicide. Inspector. So again, you've got the word obviously linked to the word perfectly, him trying to present a very simplistic view of what's happened. And then you've got the rhetorical question, Inspector, shows him attempting to take control of the situation. He's used to being in control, and he's trying to get the inspector to agree with him and concede power to him. No, sir, I can't agree with you there. So Inspector isn't taking the bait. Why not? So he's very curt. Because what happened to her then may have determined what happened to her afterwards, and what happened to her afterwards may have driven her to suicide. A chain of events. So you've got a clear and purposeful speech. Oh well, put like that, there's something in what you say. Still, I can't accept any responsibility. So can you please highlight that? I can't accept any responsibility. The word any is an intensifier, indicates his degree of selfishness. If we were all responsible for everything that happened to everybody we'd had anything to do with, it would be very awkward, wouldn't it? So a key theme in the play is this idea of social responsibility. Priestley was a socialist in a capitalist society, though it was moving towards socialism after the war, when many people were poor and were struggling to get by, especially soldiers who came back wounded and traumatized. So he was trying to push a socialist agenda and trying to get people to accept responsibility for society as a whole, not just be selfish like Mr. Burling. Very awkward. So the inspector seeming to agree shows that he's tactful and seems willing to compromise. A clear contrast between with Mr. Burling, he's very cutthroat and doesn't like compromise at all. We'd all be in an impossible position, wouldn't we? By Jove, yes. And as you were saying, Dad, a man has to look after himself. So later in the play, Eric comes out as a socialist like Sheila, but here we've got him, it's quite pitiful really, trying to get some positive affirmation and approval from his father, who doesn't seem to think very highly of him, often belittles him and puts him down. Yes, well, we didn't go into all of that. So he's very dismissive of other people, including his son. Go into what? Oh, just before you came, I'd been giving these young men a little good advice. So calling them young men, even though they're not that young, shows how he tries to present himself as knowledgeable and wise. Now, about this girl, Eva Smith. I remember her quite well now. She was a lively-looking girl, country-bred, I fancy. So, lively, good-looking girl is sexist, indicative of that society where women were objectified, so reduced to objects. They were perceived based mostly on their looks, as ornaments, not so much as people. And then country bred is very elitist. He cares a lot about class, but potentially because he came from a lower class background and therefore feels the need to assert himself as a member of the higher class. Because remember, he had a provincial accent and his wife was his social superior. So maybe that's why he always puts down other people of lower classes. And she'd been working in one of our machine shops for over a year. A good worker, too. In fact, the foreman told me that he was ready to promote her into what we call a leading operator, head of a small group of girls. But after they came back from their holidays that August, they were all rather restless, and they suddenly decided to ask for more money. They were averaging about 22 and 6, which was neither more nor less than is paid in our industry. They wanted the rates raised so that they could average about 25 shillings a week. I refused, of course. So, of course, again, linking back to his clear way of thinking. Why? Burling, surprised. Did you say why? So, surprised shows how he doesn't expect anyone to contradict him. He's used to being entirely in control. Yes. Why did you refuse? Well, Inspector, I don't see that it's any concern of yours how I choose to run my business. Is it now? So, showing his selfish attitude, he sees everyone separate, industries are separate. He doesn't see people as being connected, unlike the inspector, unlike socialist people were thinking at that time. It might be, you know. So he's not overly confrontational, unlike Burling. I don't like that tone. I'm sorry, but you asked me a question. So he's polite, but he holds his ground. And you asked me a question before that, a quite unnecessary question too. So Burling's very confrontational and aggressive. It's my duty to ask questions. So we've got a sense of responsibility which contrasts with Burling's. I would highlight it's my duty to ask questions, contrasted with it's my duty to keep labour costs down. So we've got contrasting duties duty to society, contrasting with duty to oneself. Socialism versus capitalism. And if I had agreed to this demand for a new rate, we'd have added about 12% to our labour costs. Does that satisfy you? So I refused, said I couldn't consider it. We were paying the usual rates, and if they didn't like those rates, they could go and work somewhere else. It's a free country, I told them. It isn't if you can't go and work somewhere else. Quite so. So Eric has now switched. He was determined to support his father earlier, and now he's switched his view slightly. Maybe she couldn't get a job somewhere else. Maybe she had to stay with Mr. Burling. Because unlike Mr. Burling, she was a woman, she was low class, she had very little power and control. And then we've got Burling to Eric. Look, just you keep out of this. You hadn't even started in the works when this happened. So they went on strike. That didn't last long, of course. Not if it was just after the holidays. They'd all be broke, if I know them. Right, Gerald, they mostly were. And so was the strike, after a week or two. Pitiful affair. So we've got that short sentence shows a lack of sympathy. Well, we let them all come back, at the old rates, except the 4 or 5 ringleaders who started the trouble. I went down myself and told them to clear out. And this girl, Eva Smith, was one of them. She'd had a lot to say, far too much, so she'd had to go. So we've got sexist views, far too much. Burling thinks he is a big believer in the status quo. So the status quo refers to things being kept the way they are. He doesn't think women should have a voice. He doesn't think women should speak for themselves or think for themselves. He thinks everything should keep going on as it was. So he's almost a microcosm of the old ways. You couldn't have done anything else. So you've got Gerald also representing the next generation of capitalists and also supporting Mr. Burling. Eric, he could. He could have kept her on instead of throwing her out. I call it tough luck. So Eric's got a shift towards socialism. Rubbish. So you've got an exclamatory sentence here showing his brutal, cutthroat attitude. If you don't come down sharply on these people, they'll soon be asking for the earth. So these people, very condescending and elitist, showing that class divide again. They might. I should say so. So an exclamatory sentence agreeing with Burling. They might. Again, he's much more neutral, much more tactful, the inspector. But after all, it's better to ask for the earth than take it. So this is quite a derisive remark about capitalists, implying that capitalists are greedy and socially irresponsible for taking so much from society at the expense of others. And then Burling, staring at the inspector. Staring, I would highlight, the verb indicates he doesn't understand this perspective. What did you say your name was, Inspector? Goole. Goole. So, I would write like Goole, like a ghost, which can indicate what he actually is. How do you get on with our Chief Constable, Colonel Roberts? I don't see much of him. Ironic, as we later find out it's a hoax. Perhaps I ought to warn you that he's an old friend of mine. I would highlight that, indirectly threatening the inspector with connections, wealth, and power. So, whilst the inspector is very subtle, very polite, very dignified, Burling will, I think this is quite a low blow here, that threat, that reference to his connections to get his own way. We play golf together sometimes up at West Bromley. Inspector dryly, I don't play golf. We got comic relief there. I didn't suppose you did. So golf is quite an affluent sport. It's regarded as quite an affluent sport. Eric bursting out, well, I think it's a damn shame. Inspector, no, I've never wanted to play, though he's witty and intelligent there. No, I mean about this girl, Eva Smith. So Eric, again, another shift showing a sense of conscience. So that is the end of the key moment. Please can you make sure you've written down those notes. If you need to play that bit of the video back again and pause it, that's fine, but do make sure you understand that moment. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is write down the question at the top of the slide. How does Priestley present the struggle for control? And then using your notes from today, write a response to the question above. How does this moment set up the rest of the play? So you're talking about how he presents a struggle for control in this moment and how it sets up the struggle throughout the play. Pause the video to do that now. And that is the end of today's lesson. So thank you very much for all your hard work. I look forward to seeing what you write, and I'll speak to you again next lesson. Thank you.